It's great to see all of you. We try to do these programs Sundays with Sattva every other Sunday, and we try to take up topics of common interest. So this Sunday, I've been requested to talk about how Mahabharat is relevant in today's life. It's a topic close to my heart, and I always like to talk about not just the Mahabharat but also the Bhagavad Gita, which is central in Mahabharat. So delighted all of you could join. We are going to try to take up 4 different questions. One is, what is Mahabharat? What is Mahabharat's historic setting? Then what lessons can we learn from Mahabharat and applying these lessons in today's life? So I'm delighted all of you are here to try to contemplate on these topics. I never think that I'm the one who is giving discourses. As I was telling my brother Rajan Bade here, before starting any such talks, I keep Vikram Pattarkane out of the situation. I try to contemplate on these topics, try to be sincere to the topics, and whatever comes out spontaneously is what comes out. So this is, as far as I'm concerned, Paramatma's blessing. And I'm delighted you are here to share my thoughts with me. Okay. So what is Mahabharat? Mahabharat and Ramayana are two historical texts of Bharat. Mahabharat is our history. It is our itihasa. The word itihasa means this is how it was. This is basically history. History is basically his story. The way it is understood in English is whoever writes the story, it is his story. So it is history. Now, theoretically, history is expected to be the way it was, which means itihas, isn't it? But the way history is written, it's usually written by the victor, they say. The one who wins the war writes the history. And that history is written from the point of view of the one who wins the war. That's how history is written throughout history. All right. But our itihasa is not like that. Our itihasa means the way it was. So Maharshi Vyas, who wrote Mahabharata, was not a paid journalist. This is not paid news. This is not fake news. This is the way it was. So in the Mahabharata, the good points, the strengths of bad people are also shown. And the weaknesses of good people are also shown. What does that mean? It means that even the best amongst us will have some weaknesses, and even the worst amongst us will have some strengths. So what we need to do in today's world is we need to not condemn anybody, and we need not put anybody on a pedestal either. We need to look at each other with a straight eye. We don't have to look down upon anybody, and we don't have to look up to anybody. That's one of the lessons we can learn from Mahabharata as we study Mahabharata. Okay, so throughout this presentation or throughout this talk, I will refer to all 4 questions. So I'm not going to go through all of these 4 topics one by one. I will try to connect each one of those things to today's life and how all those lessons are relevant even today. That is how this whole presentation will happen. Okay. So what is Mahabharata? It is Itihasa. It is the way it was. This is what actually happened in our country. So even today, if you go, you will see that there is a place called Kurukshetra in Haryana. And it's actually a huge flat ground on which the battle of Mahabharata actually took place. Right? This happened about 5,200 years ago, according to the current cycle of time, the way we understand it. You know, the cycle of time is relative, right? So one Ahoratra. Aho means divas, din, day, and Ratra means night. Or Nishidin, we call it, right? Nisha means night and din means day. So one night and one day is equal to Ahoratra. That is a period of approximately 24 hours. That is how long the earth takes to spin around itself. That's not how time is defined. Time is defined as the time it takes for the earth to go around itself once is divided into 24 parts, and those 24 parts are called as hours. So time is relative. One day and night, one ahoratra, is the time it takes for the earth to revolve, rotate around itself, around its own axis. All right. Based on that, this whole time scale has been devised. So we take time as a relative duration for the earth's, based on the earth's rotation around itself. Okay, so 360 such days is 1 year, and 5,200 such years ago this Mahabharata took place, or the Mahabharata war took place. The historic setting is like this, that there was a Kuru dynasty, Kuru Vamsha, in which there were two brothers. One was Dhritarashtra and the other one was Pandu. Dhritarashtra had 100 children. They were called Kauravas. And Pandu had 5 children. They were called the Pandavas. There is no reason for us to call them separately. This is the one, these Pandavas were referred to Pandavas by Dhritarashtra, the king of the Kauravas or the father of Kauravas. All of them were actually Kauravas because all of them belonged to the Kuru Vamsha. Therefore they were Kauravas. But Dhritarashtra, the king, always referred to Pandu's children as Pandavas. Okay. One of the lessons we can learn from this is whenever there is a distinction between mine and the other. So these are my people and those are other people. Whenever such a distinction happens within our mind, that's when Mahabharata starts. If there is no distinction between mine and yours, or mine and his, or mine and hers, then Mahabharata cannot even start, right? So the historic setting is like this. 5,200 years ago or 5,300 years ago, there was a big dynasty called the Kuru dynasty in which there were two brothers. One was Dhritarashtra, one was Pandu. Dhritarashtra's children were called Kauravas. He had 100 kids. Okay. Those kids were born in a, very mystical and fancy story, almost like a fairy tale, how they were born. That's a separate story. We don't have to get into that one. Okay. But he had 100 kids and all of them were supposed to be rogues. Okay, they were the king's children, so they had an attitude about themselves as they were the king's children. Okay, Pandu's children were also royal family because Pandu himself was the king's brother, right? Now he could not have children because of whatever reason, but his wife had the boon that she could have kids based on mantras she could utter, and then by the power of those mantras she could bear children. So she got that boon before she was married. And like any other teenager, she was curious to know how this works. So she tried to test it. Lo and behold, she actually got a child. She thought about the son. Okay. And by the blessing of the son, she was blessed with a son. But now she's not married. She's a teenager. What can she do? So she took this baby and she put it in a small basket and put that basket into the river. And the baby floated. This baby was Karna. This Karna was found by a couple down the river. They raised this child. Okay. This child never really knew that he was actually the son of Kunti. But he grew up like what they call Sutaputra. So he was supposedly thought of as a lower caste person. Now this caste business is also a very strange thing. We talk about caste and all that. Caste is actually translated from the word called jati in Sanskrit. Okay. Jati actually means to which species we are born. Okay. So we are all essentially Manav or Manushya Jati. We are all human beings. We are all born out of human beings. So therefore we are human Jati. We have only one caste. All of us are in one caste. That is called human caste. So if we consider all of us together as one caste, there are no further divisions. We should not consider ourselves to be divided at all. The way people were divided into society or are divided into society are based on their four tendencies. And those are called four varnas. Varna can mean color, and varna also comes from the word varnana, which means description or classification. So depending upon the way we conduct ourselves in the society, the kind of profession we undertake, or the kind of profession that comes to us naturally, based on that profession, based on that quality or characteristic, we are called either Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra. So Brahmana is the one who is contemplative, the one who is always in search of truth, who has no interest in, or who has little interest in worldly affairs, okay? Who is not selfish, who is always thinking about the well-being or the good of the entire society. That person, the contemplative person who is always thinking about the well-being of the entire society without being selfish, is called a Brahmana. The second category of people, and this is not lower or higher, all of us can actually experience these categories within ourselves, even during one day. So right now, since we are contemplative, we are trying to contemplate on things, we are all Brahmanas, regardless of which family in which we were born. Okay. The second type of people are the ones who are administrators, warriors, the go-getters, and the rulers. They will naturally be inclined towards administering and to be warriors, to be in the military, to protect the country and the society. Those are called the Kshatriyas. The third category of people are the Vaishyas. Vaishya means the people who trade, who are into transactional businesses. Okay, so these are Vaishya. So the ones who are providing things for the society, okay, in exchange for something that they get in return. So this is transactional. So that is a Vaishya. So agricultural, farmers, traders, all kinds of professionals, they will all be Vaishyas. Then the fourth category would be the Shudras. Shudras are the ones who support the society, manual laborers. We are all four of these during the day. And Shudras will do certain manual physical tasks that other categories of people may not do. And they are not inclined towards that because Shudras will be more physically oriented and they will do manual labor and things like that. Brahmanas may not have the kind of physique to be able to do that. It doesn't mean that Shudras are any less than Brahmanas. No. Compare this whole thing with our own body. Okay, so this whole body is like one unit, isn't it? Head, the part where contemplation takes place, knowledge takes place. This is like the Brahmana. Then the arms will be like the Kshatriyas. Okay, arms are the ones that actually do things and protect ourselves and things like that. So if there is an attack, then we will use our hands to protect ourselves, isn't it? So that is the Kshatriya. Then we look at our belly. That's where all the transaction is taking place, all the food is getting metabolized and things like that. So that is like the Vaishya. And then you look at the feet, lower part of the body. Now, unless that lower part of the body is strong, will the body be able to stand up on itself? Absolutely not. So Shudras are the strength of any society, on the basis of which the entire society can stand strong. So no part of the body is any less than any other part of the body. All of them have to function in coordination. So all four categories of people, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, they all have to work in coordination with each other. That is when the entire body will work properly, isn't it? That is how the society will work properly. So therefore, the lesson for today from all this is caste is only imaginary. Caste is a definition politicians have devised to divide us and rule over us. So there is no such thing as caste. We should forget about what caste means. Okay, caste means jati, and jati means we are all one jati, that is Manushya jati. We belong to one caste, which is called human caste. So we should always remain as human beings, and any other divisions are completely imaginary. There is no reason for us to believe in any of that. The categories of people, they all have to work in coordination with each other like a team, so that the entire society, entire country, entire world will go in one direction, and we all will benefit. So that is the difference between jati and varna. So this is something we learn even in the Gita. Krishna says that he is the one who has made these divisions based on guna karma vibhagashaya. So people's inherent tendencies as well as the kind of work they do. So the lesson today is no caste, only varna, and no varna is superior to the other varna. All of them are equal. They all work in coordination with each other based on people's tendencies. So some people may be naturally contemplative. So in their life, contemplation will manifest itself naturally. In some people's mind, they are more go-getters. So they will naturally become administrators. It's okay. Brahmanas don't have to unnecessarily think that these Kshatriyas are ruling over us. No need at all. Let them do what they want to do. Let the Prime Minister run the country. Let me do what I can do where I am. So the other lesson we learn from this Mahabharata is wherever I am, whatever I am, whenever I am, I shall be 100%. I shall do what is supposed to be done by me at any given time, at any given place, whatever is appropriate in coordination with the rest of the society and contribute to the society. So my contemplation should always be what can I do for the society rather than what can the society do for me. So this is a famous quote by the former American President John F. Kennedy. Think not what the country can do for you, but think what you can do for your country. I will take it further. Think not what the world can do for you, but think what you can do for the world. Why just the country? The whole world is my own family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Hey Vishwaji Maze Ghara. This whole world is my abode, isn't it? So if we contemplate on such things, then the lessons from Mahabharata will become relevant even today. Why has Mahabharata continued to be a story told from generation to generation until now? Because it is relevant. Because from that story, we can learn lessons, we can learn some principles and the truths that are relevant even today. They will always be relevant because these are timeless truths. Okay, the wisdom in Mahabharata and in the Gita is timeless. Timeless meaning it's beyond time. It's always relevant. That's how we need to look at the Mahabharata. Even though at this time Mahabharata is only a story, isn't it? Even if it had happened 5,200 years ago, at this time, how do we know it? We know it only as a story, only as a memory in our own mind. All of us right now can experience only the present moment. We cannot really experience the past because it has already gone. We cannot experience the future because it is not here yet. Do we have any choice but to live in the present? We have no choice. From these stories, all we need to learn is how we should conduct our life right now, today, because that's all the choice we have. Our choice is to be able to live in the present moment. So how can we live in the present moment and how can we make it very joyful based on what we have learned? in the past. Those are the lessons we need to learn, right? So we know about the historic setting of Mahabharata 5,200 years ago. Then it is relevant even today because it keeps telling us the lessons that we should be applying even in today's life. Okay? In the Mahabharata, the entire story is based on what I would call man and apaman. So pride, prejudice, those things, right? So the story goes like this. There was a big amusement park. In that amusement park, there were all kinds of fancy things. Like when we go to a mela in today's age, sometimes we'll go and see a stall in which there are many different kinds of mirrors. In those mirrors, we will see our image as either too tall or too fat or twisted. Depending upon how the mirror is, our image will appear different. Our reflection will appear different. And it's funny. In that amusement park, there was a particular pavilion where when you walk, you think that there is a door and you try to walk through the door, but you actually hit a ball. That's the illusion that was created. Okay, then there is another place where it appears to be a wall, but it is actually a door. These are different kinds of illusions that were created in that amusement park. In that park, Duryodhan, the eldest son of Dhritarashtra, was walking. Dhritarashtra was born blind, okay? So this Duryodhan walked and he ran into a wall, thinking it was a door. So Draupadi, who was the wife of the Pandavas, she actually laughed. And she commented, अंधे का बेटा तो अंधा ही होगा. Blind father's son will be blind. And she was sarcastic. Any need for making a comment like this? What is the need? Lesson we have to learn is, देखो, सुनो, बोलो मत. You can see the things the way they are, but there is no need to comment. Why is there any need to comment? And such a derogatory comment. Mahabharata actually started from that. Then Duryodhan said to himself, मैं तुमको देख लूंगा. I will see you. Then he devised a game of dice. And he invited all 5 husbands of Draupadi. Dharmaraj, Yudhishthir, Bhima, the mighty armed one, and then Arjuna, the greatest archer, Nakul and Sahadev, the 2 little brothers, the twins. And they said, okay, we'll play a game. Now this Duryodhan brought his advisor, his mama called Shakuni. This mama Shakuni came from a place called Gandhar, which is today's Kandahar, or which is today in Afghanistan. Okay, so he brought his mama with him because mama, Shakuni mama, was an expert in fixing the match. So he was an expert in match fixing. So what he did is he loaded or preloaded those dice so that they will appear the way they are supposed to appear in Duryodhana's mind. So Duryodhana, while throwing the dice, he will ask Shakuni, what should I be calling for? And that is what used to come. So it was all preloaded, prefixed. So match fixing has been going on since that time. Okay, it's not new. In this game, he kept on defeating Dharmaraj or Yudhishthir. He was the captain of the opposing team. Now, just imagine, if I'm not able to play a certain game, or if I'm not able to perform a certain task properly, it is best I call in somebody who can help me, isn't it? Like call a consultant or call an advisor, and he will advise me, isn't it? Duryodhan brought in his mama, who was an expert in playing dice, because he wanted to win the game and he wanted to defeat these Pandavas. He wanted to show and teach them a lesson, or teach Draupadi a lesson. That is why he wanted to play the game. Now, Yudhishthir or Dharmaraj would have also called his advisor Krishna. but he never called him because he was ashamed to tell Krishna that he was going to play a game of dice and play it like a gamble. It was a gambling game, right? So you play the game of dice and you bet something. It was a betting game. So betting game is not a good game. Even Dharmaraj knew. But because he was challenged by Duryodhan, how can you refuse the challenge of a king? A king cannot refuse the challenge of another king. That is the notion he had, right? So he went for the game, but he did not tell Krishna because he was ashamed. If Krishna had been on the side of Pandavas, Pandavas would not have lost the game, isn't it? But Dharmaraj did not call Krishna, played the game, lost it, kept losing. Ultimately, there was only one thing left to lose. So Duryodhan said, why don't you bet your wife? If you win, then whatever I have won so far, the whole thing is yours. Last bet. Dharmaraj actually fell for that trap. He bet his wife and he lost her. Lesson we can learn from this. First of all, don't get into a gambling game at all. This I learned from one of my professors when I was in college. At one time, there was a game in one of our college melas of, some kind of gambling game. He saw me playing that game and he told me one sentence, which I remember now, even now. He told me, Vikram, never believe in luck. Always believe in karma, which means you do your job and you will get some return. Be happy with that return. Never buy a lottery ticket or never think that you are going to get a lottery ever. Okay, because you will lose a lot in that. You may not gain too much by doing karma because the karma phala or whatever you get in return may not be too much, but it will be guaranteed. Because you do a sincere effort, you will get something in return. But when you gamble, then you will have lost quite a bit. Never do that. And I still remember that. So since that date, I have never bet on anything ever. Whatever I want to get, I would work towards it and get it. So the lesson is never gamble in life. Always do what you are supposed to do. And whatever you get in return, be content with it. That's the lesson. When we do that. And the third lesson is if you cannot accomplish something, then bring in somebody who's an expert. If I don't understand something, why don't I bring somebody in who can help me? That's the lesson to be learned from this. After that, after losing even the wife. Now, after winning this wife, supposedly, the wife, Draupadi, was in her menses. So she was actually sitting in her private room and isolating herself. Dushasan, the second brother, went and brought her. She said, no, I'm secluding myself. I'm in quarantine or whatever. Nothing doing. This fellow caught hold of her hair and dragged her into the darbar, into the assembly. And lo and behold, started disrobing her. How shameless. And while this was happening, people like Bhishmacharya and Dronacharya, who were the elders in the assembly, were just watching. They did not say anything at all. So you see, this entire event was not described in any way other than it was. So Dronacharya or Vyasadeva has described this entire thing as it was. So he has shown the weaknesses of Bhishmacharya and Dronacharya, who were the elders. Dronacharya was the family guru of this entire clan. He was the one who had taught archery to all of them. Bhishmacharya was the grand uncle of Pandavas and Kauravas. But even then, they did not intervene. They should have. They did not, right? Now, Draupadi kept on calling her husbands one by one, but none of them actually helped because they had all lost. So none of them helped. Then she called for Krishna. And what Krishna did was he kept on providing her sari after sari after sari after sari. So Dushasan kept on disrobing her, but the sari would never end. It was like an infinite sari. So she was never actually disrobed. So that's how the story was, right? Now the moral of that story is when Draupadi was trying to seek help from her husbands, they were unable to help her. But when she sought help, when she sincerely sought help from Krishna himself, from the Lord himself, he helped her. Then when he was asked, why did you not provide me the help before? He said, nobody asked me. He says, I could have easily come and I could have told you that this match is fixed or how to unfix it or whatever. And I could have made you win also. But you never told me before starting the game. You never told me. I don't intervene unless I am asked. So the other lesson we learn is don't interfere in people's lives unless asked for. Okay. Even though we may have good intentions, people may not appreciate that. So the lesson I have learned from this is we should always be willing to help, but we should not thrust our help down somebody's throat. That's the lesson I have learned from this. But be willing to help. Okay. Then this whole thing happened. Then, after losing this whole game, then the Pandavas were sent into the jungle for 14 years, or actually 12 years. 12 years in the jungle, and then after that buy 12 and get one free. So 1 year was in incognito mode. So during that extra 1 year, they are supposed to be in incognito mode. So nobody should be able to recognize who they are. That's how they actually completed all of this. And then after that, when they came back, they wanted to see if they could get their kingdom back, half the kingdom back. That was their right. Forget about half the kingdom. Duryodhan was not willing to give them even 5 villages, not even 5 houses. He said, I'm not going to give you any land at all, not even the amount of land that you could hold on the tip of a pin. Not even that much. I will not give you anything unless you do a war. What to do? During these 13 years, Duryodhana had run the kingdom in such a bad manner that people were simply completely disillusioned and they were suffering because of this misgovernance. So everybody was wanting and eagerly waiting for the Pandavas to come back and rule at least half the kingdom. Didn't happen. So this war of Mahabharat was thrust upon the Pandavas. And after doing all kinds of diplomacy failed and the war was inevitable. The war happened. In the middle of the war, Arjuna, who was the general of the Pandava army, actually had cold feet because he saw that he had to fight with his relatives, his guru, his father's uncle, his cousin brothers, and all that. And he started arguing with Krishna. How can I fight these people? If I fight these people, if I kill them, then I will get papa, I will get demerit or sin, and I will go to hell. All of these things he started imagining, and he lost courage to fight. During that time, in the middle of the war, on the battleground, Krishna had to tell Arjun the Gita. That's the greatest epic or the greatest book we have as people who follow the Vedic Dharma. In this, the entire essence of all of the Vedic wisdom is condensed. So the entire knowledge of the world is called the Vedas. These Vedas are extracted, or the knowledge of the Vedas is extracted in the Upanishads, which is called the Vedanta, or the end of the Vedas, or the fundamental essential part of Vedas. All of that knowledge is extracted and presented in the Gita. was presented by Bhagwan Krishna to Arjun on the battlefield. That is why the Gita is the most important book for all of us. If we understand the fundamental lessons of the Gita, those lessons are relevant even today. So what are the fundamental lessons of the Gita? Number one lesson, that I have considered myself to be this body. I have considered that I am within this body and outside is the world. That's not true. Number one, I'm not the body. Number two, I consider myself to be an individual jiva or an individual entity apart from all of you. That assumption of separateness is an illusion. That is the second lesson. And third lesson is there is nothing here other than myself. This entire world appears in me as an image. And the world I see outside is my own mind's projection. That's why, while commenting on the Upanishads and on the Gita, Shankaracharya, our greatest guru, 1400 years ago, told us, Brahma Satya, Jagan Mithya, and Jivo Brahmaiva Napara, which means that the world we see outside is an appearance. Is Mithya means it appears to be, but it is not the way we think it is. Okay. And Jivo Brahmaiva Napara means Jiva means this individual soul, we call it. This is not different from the ultimate reality, Brahma. Brahman is supposed to be the ultimate reality. It's very difficult to say and talk about all these things, condense them in a talk of 30, 40, 45 minutes. But I'm trying my best. Think of your own experience of right now. Forget about all the books, forget about history, forget about the Gita, forget about Mahabharata. Think about the experience of right now. Contemplate on this. How are you seeing me? You are seeing me on your screen. What are you seeing? You are seeing a shape, and within that shape, there are colors. What are you experiencing through your ears? My voice, isn't it? What is actually happening is you are thinking that I'm talking to you from Pennsylvania, but the experience is happening within you. In your mind, you are experiencing a shape, colors, and sounds. This experience is happening within you. To that experience, you have given a name, Vikram Pattarkine, and English language, and a talk on Mahabharata. So you are comprehending your experience or your sensations in your mind as I just told you. So this world outside is actually a projection of our own mind. Whatever we are experiencing, we are calling it the world. And what kind of world? The way we have experienced world in the past. That is called the samskaras. So whatever samskaras we might have had, whatever impressions we might have gathered in the past, and whatever those impressions might have meant to us, based on those impressions, we will interpret the current experience. That's the lesson. If we understand this lesson correctly, then we will know that the world outside is only a projection of my own mind. And to the extent my mind is purified, the world outside becomes purer and purer and purer. The world outside is actually pure. Impurity is in my own mind. So if I purify my mind, then the world outside will appear to me the way it is supposed to appear. Pure, divine, flawless. The world outside goes and runs according to laws of nature, which are perfect. How many years or since how many years has the world been spinning around itself? Since how many years has the earth been spinning around the sun? For how many years has the sun been spinning around the center of the Milky Way galaxy? Don't even know. This is happening perfectly. Scientists only discover the laws of nature. Scientists don't make the laws of nature. So Newton's laws were not made by Newton. Newton's laws were discovered by Newton. So these laws govern our external life. Okay. But our internal life is governed by our sanskaras and how pure our mind is. How do we purify our mind? In our experience, what we have learned, or what I have learned, which I share with everybody else, is when we purify our diet, our mind is purified. So diet purification to mind purification. Ahar Shuddhi se Chitta Shuddhi. This is what this entire Sattva program is built upon. Okay. What we do is we inculcate a discipline of Ahar Shuddhi in the minds of all of our participants. Once they inculcate that discipline in their mind, because of Ahar Shuddhi, first the Deha Shuddhi happens. So the body gets detoxified very quickly. And then as the body gets detoxified, the mind gets detoxified. And in a clear mind, in a steady mind, in a still mind, the world is reflected beautifully. If you see a calm and quiet lake in the winter, there is no wind, there are no ripples, there are no waves. You will see in the lake a beautiful reflection of the trees and everything else around it. You will see it inverted. This is the description Bhagavan gives in the 15th chapter of the world. He says, Urdhvamulam adhashakam ashvatham prahuravyayam chandamsi yasya parnani yastam vedasa vedavit, which means that the one who understands the world in this manner, that it appears to be upside down, he is the one who knows the Vedas. When we learn this thing, the nature of the world, then he talks about what is a jiva. Jiva is the one who appears to be going from one body into another and carrying the sanskaras or the vasanas from one body to another, just like the wind carries fragrance when it carries fragrance from one flower to another, or when it flows over a flower or a fragrant flower, then the fragrance of the flower is carried by the wind. Vayur Gandhani Vashayat. Okay. Then he talks about what is Ishvara, the one who I think of as God. Who is that? So the divinity or Ishvara will manifest in many things. The sun, the moon, the earth, even the Agni in my belly. He says, Aham Vaishvanaro Bhutva Praninam Deham Ashritaha Pranapana Samayukta Pachamyanam Chaturvidam. So the food that I eat is digested by the digestive fire within my belly. That is not under my control. That is under divine control. So God will manifest himself in all of these forms. Then ultimately, Bhagavan says, who am I? In which he talks about when I get impressions of the world, a sense of duality is created. A sense of experiencer and experienced world is created. This duality is called Dvaita. Okay? But all that is happening is in our own mind. Nothing is actually happening. We get the impression that something is happening. We get the impression that we are observing something, but that thing which we are observing is actually experienced in our own mind only as an impression, as an image. So we are not really experiencing the world as it is. We experience only the reflection of the world in our own mind. And both the reflection in our mind, or whatever we experience in our mind as a sensation, that and the external world are interdependent. They are dependent upon each other. They are mutually dependent. And neither can exist without the other. But both of them are illusory. They cannot exist unless I exist. And I get that experience every day. When I go to sleep, everything disappears. The whole world disappears. You may say that the world appears for everybody else. The world may exist. Forget about everybody else's experience. You think about your experience. Do you have other people's experience? No. You have only your own experience. I have only my experience. I don't have anybody else's experience. So in my experience, the world disappears and it reappears when I wake up. So the world gets created when I wake up from my sleep, and the world disappears when I go to sleep. That's what happens. So the world is actually experienced by us as impressions, as sensations in our own mind. When we settle those sensations, just like Patanjali Muni says, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, in that experience, the world will disappear. So yoga is the way to shut the world down by shutting our eyes, closing down. locking ourselves in. But Vedanta goes one step beyond. Vedanta will teach me that this world is actually an appearance. So whether it is there or not there, how will it matter? It won't matter. So the person who is awakened to his own self, that person will not be affected by anything happening in the world. World's events will not make an impression on his mind. Sukha dukhe same krutva labha labho jaya jayo tato yuddhaya yujyasva naivam papam avapsasi. That is the kind of experience the enlightened one will always have. Okay. Dukheshu anudvignamana sukheshu vigataspruha vitaragabhaya krodha stitadirmuruchyate. So he will not be perturbed by events that cause dukkha. Dukheshu anudvignamana. So his mind will be steady in dukkha. Sukheshu vigataspruha means he will not have the spruha, he will not have the craving that good times will continue to happen. He will take life equanimously. That is how the person with steady intellect, the person with steady wisdom, the person who is enlightened to his own self, the one who has woken up to his true self from the dream-like waking experience, he will experience it in this manner. That is the ultimate experience of human life, to know who we are. Vedaishcha sarvair ahameva vedyo vedantakrut veda videvachaham. That's what Bhagavan says in the 15th verse of the 15th chapter. That's the essence of the entire Vedic wisdom. If we understand ourselves in this manner, then we will get the feeling, the experience of Krutakrutyata, which means we have done whatever we need to do in this life. We've understood who we are. Then we will continue to do whatever we are supposed to do, or we have been programmed to do, but we'll do it with a completely different attitude. At the end of it, Bhagavan says, Iti guhyatamam shastram idam uktam maya nagha etad buddha buddhiman syat krutakrutyascha bharata. Murli, you are unmuted. Murli, please mute yourself. I'm muting you. So, etad buddha buddhiman syat krutakrutyascha bharata. That's the final teaching of the Gita. When I understand who I am, when I realize who I am, that's when dukkha nivrutti will happen. Sorrow will completely come to an end. And nirankusha trupti will happen. So I'll be happy, I'll be joyful, I will be blissful without any reason. That's the ultimate aim of human life. That's why we are here. I wish and I pray everybody gets that experience. The first step towards that, the fundamental rule of life, I shall not eat until I'm hungry. Thank you. Any questions or comments anybody has? You have to unmute yourself and ask a question, one person at a time, please. That will be great. Murali, my friend who is here, would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question? Do you have a question in your mind?
Yes, Vikram. Very happy to listen to the entire session. A lot of awakening within me.
Thank you for attending.
Yeah, and it's all good to listen, but when it comes to practice, it takes a long time, very long time to practice it. Yeah. Any
See,
secret?
what we do, secret, you are asking me how to do it. That is great. How to do it? See, we always go and pick the lowest hanging fruit. When we go to the orchard, what we do is we try to pick the lowest hanging fruit. So whatever you can easily do, you start doing it. When we start doing the easy things first, then the more difficult things will start happening, or will become more confident. See, that is why we go through school. No, first we go through first standard, second standard, third standard, up to 10th standard. Every year, the curriculum becomes more and more and more difficult. So the first step we all need to take in this journey towards understanding who we are is, I shall not eat until I'm hungry. That is the first step. Let's try that. I think Aniket Inamdar, you wanted to say something. Please unmute and then ask. Go ahead, Aniket.
Vikram sir, it's really nice listening to you, sir. Actually, this is the first time that I listened to you. I have been a member of Sustainable Living Group. You might be aware in India that there is a group who take a lot of interest in sustainability, and they usually promote your lots of your courses on their groups. So I am an MD physician. I am a consultant general physician, and I have very much respect for Ayurveda and the truly holistic way of living which you preach and which you promote. And it's really nice because in today's world, I am a basically let me talk to you something about myself, because I am a researcher also. So I do a lot of research in cardiometabolic diseases also. So where we study a lot of impact of day-to-day stress and day-to-day habits, dietary habits or lifestyle patterns, and how they are impacting our the chronic, the metabolic health, and leading to the diseases like diabetes, hypertension, and so many hypercholesteremia will be there. Obesity, which we are seeing as a pandemic, which in India and throughout the world. So, so what you said just now, that whenever you are hungry, that time only you eat. So if we just follow this simple pattern and or a simple change in our dietary pattern or lifestyle, I think many diseases can be reversed. Many of the diseases can be reversed, and this is a really basic idea, which is a basic concept in Ayurveda, that unless and until you are hungry, unless and until you are thirsty, you should not drink water, and unless and until you are hungry, you should not eat anything. If
Correct.
we follow these simple things, these simple things are going to reverse the whole process of cardiometabolic diseases which we are going through, sir.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
I really congratulate you on this for this propagating this basic concept and changing the minds of people, so that unless and until we intervene in these daily habits, we are not going to stop this pandemic, sir. This is going to going at such a speed in India and throughout the world. Unless we intervene at this lifestyle and daily habit patterns, it's not going to stop, sir.
Correct. So we should take this pandemic also as a lesson for ourselves.
Yeah.
So if we can learn this lesson from this pandemic, would that not be good? That
Yes,
will be
sir.
great.
Yes, sir.
So
yes,
thank you so much for attending our program and saying these wonderful, encouraging words.
Yeah.
Delighted you are here. You should talk to us separately and try to learn what fun things we do.
Yeah, sir. Actually, I will be interested to join your group also, sir, because what happens, we have lots of interest in common, sir. Because I am also in though I am in a practitioner of modern medicine, but I have a full faith and trust in Ayurveda and the yoga. So which I try to integrate with the modern medicine, and we do a lot of research in that particular aspects also. And for your kind information, मी ज्ञानेश्वरी सुद्धा वाचतो, ज्ञानेश्वरीवर प्रवचन सुद्धा करतो. कारण की योगाची सुंदर व्याख्या ज्ञानेश्वरीमध्ये केले, म्हणजे ज्ञानेश्वरीमध्ये ज्यावेळेला सांगितलेलं आहे की अर्जुना समत्व चित्ताचे तेची सार जाण योगाचे, जेथे मन आणि बुद्धीचे ऐक्य आती. तर
समत्वम योग उच्यते.
Yes. Unless and until we understand that equilibrium of mind and body, we will not going to get anywhere, sir.
Fantastic. So why don't you give me your number, send me the number on the chat, and then we'll have a chat separately on this also.
I'll just like to add here, sir. I think Aniket has already registered for meeting us, right?
Tomorrow's session, sir.
Yes. Yeah. I just responded to your email, so we'll take it from there. Nice hearing you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions anybody has? So Mahabharata has come down all the way to our daily life, where we don't eat unless we are hungry. That's the lesson. Okay. Ruchi Pandey has unmuted, or she has raised a hand. So why don't you ask a question, Ruchi, please? Go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah, Ruchi. Nice to see you.
Sir.
Yes.
Sir, as you said just now, that we should eat only when we feel the need to eat. So,
correct.
What message will you give to us, to the youngsters? Because there are a lot of distractions in our way of living a healthy life. So can you please explain how can we achieve self-control, like controlling our temptations?
Correct. So Ruchi, good. I'm so glad you are here. You are representing the young generation. Young and old are notions we have in our own mind. Okay.
Yes.
Time, as I said, is also a notion in our mind. Can you live in the past? You cannot. Can you live in the future? You cannot. You don't have any choice but to live in the present. isn't it? When you see changes in the world and you think of those changes as real, that's when you get the impression of time. That's when the impression of time is created. That's when the illusion of time is created. In your own mind or in your own awareness, time is not relevant at all. You always live in the present. Now you tell me, when you were a little girl, when you went to primary school, then you went to middle school, then you went to high school, maybe you are in college now. During this time, what changes have happened in your awareness of your own self? That I am alive. In that awareness of aliveness, have you ever had any change? You know, you used to wake up early in the morning, or whenever you used to wake up as a child or as a teenager or now, there is no change in yourself, isn't it? So that awareness of your own true self, which is not changing, is the true you. That's your own true self. That's your own essential nature. If you always contemplate on that, if you focus on that, then you will realize that these changes happen within us. You know, you don't become a child, you don't become a teenager, you don't become an adult, but childhood, teenager age, or adulthood, they all go through you. Okay. So when you understand yourself in this manner, and when you try to look at the world the way it is, as an illusion, then of course you will end up doing what you need to do in the world. So if you're hungry, you will have to eat. Absolutely. But you eat only when you're hungry. So the first step we should all do, whether we are children or teenagers or adults or older people or whatever, 99 people out of 100 eat whenever they see food in front of them. They don't ask themselves whether I'm hungry or not. If you eat only when you're hungry, then all of these other things start appearing in your heart on their own. Okay, so you become contemplative. Have you seen any animal eating when the animal is not hungry? Forget about animals, even babies, little kids, little children. So the little baby has enough wisdom or intuitive ability to throw away what the child doesn't need. Okay, so children don't eat when they are not hungry. So why do we, when we grow up, eat when we are not hungry? Because we see food and we think that eating that food is going to give me pleasure. So I'm looking at the pleasure rather than the need. What Bhagavan says in the 15th chapter, he says, Gama Vishya Bhutani Dharayamyahamo Jasa Pushnami Choshadi Sarva Somo Bhutva Rasatmaka. So he calls food as medicine. Our disease is called hunger. And to satisfy or to cure that disease, the medicine is the food. So if we take food as medicine, then our bodies will always remain healthy. That is the fundamental understanding of Ayurveda. Okay. But when you put food into the body when the body is not hungry, then the same food, which is the medicine, will act as a poison. So imagine you are sick and then you go to the doctor, our good friend, Dr. Inamdar here, the MD medicine, and he prescribes you a medicine and he tells you, you know, in the morning you take 2 tablets and in the evening you take two tablets. And you say to yourself that I want to become well very quickly. So will you eat the entire bottle at once? No, it will kill you. That's exactly what is happening to us when we are not treating food as medicine, but when we are treating food as pleasure. That's what is our problem. And we treat everything in this world in that manner. See, I am not advocating that you should not enjoy things in the world, or you will not feel happiness or joy when you are coming in contact with things in the world. You will. So when you see something beautiful, you feel good. When you eat something tasty, you feel good. But you need to know how much of it to use. You should use things in the world to the extent they are necessary. So you should live in this world at the need level. Our problem is we live in this world at the greed level. So as Gandhi used to say, that this world has enough for everybody's need, but this world doesn't have enough for even one person's greed. So who has unmuted? Anybody wants to say something?
Yes, sir, got it. Thank you, sir, for the explanation.
You are most welcome. So who has unmuted himself? or herself. If you have any questions, we'll take those. Otherwise, our 1 hour is over. So I'm going to close this recording, but I'll stay here for a few minutes. Okay. So thank you so much for attending. It's a great pleasure to have you here. We'll meet you once again another Sunday. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
We have